The text message came through at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, just as I was settling into bed with my book. Mom, we need to talk. Can you come by tomorrow morning? Early. It was from my son Daniel, and something about the formality of it made my stomach clench. Daniel never texted like that. He called, he dropped by unannounced with his wife Rebecca. He sent me funny memes at random hours. But this cold, distant message felt like a summons rather than an invitation. I stared at my phone screen, reading and rereading those 12 words, trying to find some hidden meaning in the punctuation, some clue in the spacing. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, wanting to call him immediately, to demand to know what was wrong. Instead, I typed back a simple, of course, sweetheart. What time? His response was immediate. 7 a.m. Before work. My heart sank further. Whatever this was, it was serious enough that he couldn't wait until a normal visiting hour, couldn't even give me the courtesy of a phone call to prepare me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind spun through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Was Rebecca pregnant and there were complications? Had Daniel lost his job? Were they moving across the country? The house I'd helped them buy just 3 years ago, the one I'd co-signed for because their credit wasn't quite strong enough on its own, surely they weren't selling it already. I'd poured my heart into helping them decorate that place, spending weekends painting rooms and hanging curtains, teaching Rebecca how to use my grandmother's china that I'd given them as a wedding gift. At 6:15 the next morning, I pulled into their driveway in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Maplewood Heights. The house looked perfect as always, with its pale yellow siding and the flower beds I'd helped Rebecca plant last spring. Daniel's car was in the driveway, but I noticed Rebecca's wasn't. That struck me as odd. If this was a family conversation, wouldn't she be here? Daniel answered the door before I could knock, as if he'd been watching for me through the window. His face was carefully neutral, the expression he used to wear as a teenager when he was about to tell me something he knew I wouldn't like. He was 32 years old now, a successful architect with his own small firm, but in that moment he looked exactly like the boy who'd once had to confess he'd dented my car. "Mom," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "Thanks for coming so early." The formality in his voice made my skin prickle with anxiety. I stepped into the foyer, noting that something felt different about the house but unable to immediately identify what. Then it hit me. The photos were different. The wall where our family pictures had hung, the ones from Daniel's childhood, his graduation, our vacations together, they were gone. In their place were photos I'd never seen before. Rebecca with an older woman who must be her mother, both of them laughing at what looked like a beach somewhere. Rebecca and the same woman at what appeared to be a cooking class. More photos of the two of them, their heads close together, smiling. "Daniel, what's going on?" I kept my voice steady even though my hands were starting to shake. "Where's Rebecca?" "She's at her mother's." He gestured toward the living room. "Can we sit down?" I followed him, my eyes continuing to scan the space. More changes. The throw pillows I'd made for them, with fabric I'd carefully selected to match their color scheme, were gone. The Afghan my mother had crocheted, the one I'd given them for their first Christmas in the house, wasn't draped over the back of the couch anymore. Even the small ceramic dish I brought back from my trip to Santa Fe, the one where they used to keep their keys, had vanished from the entry table. We sat down, Daniel on the couch, me in the armchair across from him. The morning light was just starting to filter through the windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors I'd helped them refinish. He cleared his throat twice before speaking, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. "Mom, Rebecca and I have been talking a lot lately about our living situation and our future." He wasn't meeting my eyes, instead focusing on a spot somewhere over my left shoulder. "And we've realized that we need to make some changes that are going to be better for our marriage and our household." The formal language, the rehearsed tone, this wasn't my son speaking. This was someone who'd been coached, who'd practiced these words until they lost all natural inflection. "What kind of changes?" I asked, though part of me already knew I wasn't going to like the answer. Daniel finally looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that broke my heart. It was pity mixed with determination, the look of someone about to deliver a blow they believed was necessary. "Patricia is going to be moving in with us. Rebecca's mother. She's been having some financial difficulties since her divorce, and Rebecca feels strongly that we should support her during this transition. I felt like I'd been slapped. Patricia, Rebecca's mother, who I'd met exactly 4 times in the 3 years since the wedding. A woman who'd made it abundantly clear at every meeting that she thought her daughter could have done better than marrying an architect from a middle-class family. A woman who'd turned her nose up at the rehearsal dinner I'd hosted, commenting loudly that in her family, they usually had wedding events at country clubs, not restaurant banquet rooms. "That's very generous of you both," I managed to say, though my throat felt tight. "I'm sure Patricia appreciates it." Daniel shifted uncomfortably on the couch. "The thing is, Mom, with Patricia moving in, we're going to need to make some adjustments. The guest room where you usually stay when you visit, that's going to be Patricia's room now. And we're going to need to establish some new boundaries about visits and family time." The words hung in the air between us like a physical presence. I stared at my son, this man I'd raised alone after his father walked out when Daniel was just 6 years old. I'd worked 2 jobs to keep us in a decent school district. I'd sat through every parent-teacher conference, attended every soccer game, helped with every school project. I'd saved for years to help with his college tuition, gone without vacations and new clothes and sometimes even basic comforts to make sure he had opportunities I'd never had. "Boundaries," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "What kind of boundaries, Daniel?" He pulled out his phone and I realized with a sinking feeling that he had notes prepared. He'd actually written down what he was going to say to me, probably with Rebecca's input, maybe even with Patricia's. "We think it would be best if you called before visiting rather than just dropping by. And maybe we could set up a regular schedule like Sunday dinners twice a month. That way everyone knows what to expect, and we can plan accordingly." "Everyone," I said flatly. "You mean Patricia?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I mean our household. Mom, you have to understand Rebecca has been feeling overwhelmed. She says you're here constantly, that you have opinions about everything from how we decorate to how we should be planning for our future. She needs her mother's support right now, and frankly, Patricia has been through a difficult divorce. She needs us." I thought about the past 3 years, about every time I'd been called because they needed help with something. When their washing machine broke and they couldn't afford a new one, who'd bought them the replacement? When Rebecca wanted to redo their kitchen but they were short on the budget, who'd contributed $3,000 and spent weekends helping them paint cabinets? When Daniel's firm was going through a rough patch and they were worried about making the mortgage, who'd quietly paid 2 months' worth of payments without ever asking to be repaid? "I see," I said, standing up. My legs felt shaky, but I refused to let him see how much this was affecting me. "So Patricia is moving into my room, taking my place in family photos, and I'm being put on a visiting schedule like some distant relative who overstays her welcome." Daniel stood too, frustration creeping into his voice. "It's not like that, Mom. You're making this about you when it's really about what's best for our marriage. Rebecca and I are a team and we have to prioritize our relationship and our household. Her mother needs help right now, and we're in a position to provide it. I thought you'd be happy that we're being supportive and generous." "Happy?" I repeated, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. "You want me to be happy that I'm being replaced by a woman who has made it crystal clear she thinks I'm not good enough, that my contributions don't matter, that everything I've done for you and Rebecca somehow isn't sufficient? That's not what this is about." Daniel's voice rose slightly. "God, Mom, this is exactly what Rebecca was talking about. You make everything about you. You act like we owe you something because you helped us out a few times. We're trying to build our own life here, and we need space to do that." The words cut deeper than I think he intended. Few times. 3 years of constant support, emotional and financial, reduced to a casual dismissal. I looked around the living room one more time, taking in all the changes, all the ways I'd already been erased from their space. "When did all this happen?" I asked quietly. "The photos, the decorations, all the things I gave you. When did you remove them?" Daniel had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Last weekend, while you were at your book club, Patricia helped Rebecca redecorate. She has a really good eye for design, and Rebecca felt like the house needed a more mature, sophisticated look. A more mature, sophisticated look. Translation: everything I'd contributed was juvenile and tasteless." I walked toward the front door, Needing to leave before the tears I was fighting so hard to hold back started to fall. Daniel followed me, his voice taking on a pleading quality. Mom, please don't leave like this. I need you to understand that this isn't personal. This is about Rebecca and me creating healthy boundaries and building our marriage. Her therapist says that enmeshed family relationships are toxic, and that we need to establish independence. Her therapist? Of course. I wondered how many therapy sessions had been spent discussing the problem of Daniel's overbearing mother, the woman who just wouldn't give them space, who didn't understand that her time had passed, and she needed to step aside for the newer, better mother figure. I stopped with my hand on the doorknob and turned back to face my son. For a moment I considered telling him everything, revealing the truth that I'd kept carefully hidden for 3 years. But looking at his face, at the mixture of guilt and defensiveness there, I realized he wasn't ready to hear it.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
He'd made his choice, aligned himself with his wife and her mother, and nothing I said right now would change that. You're right, Daniel, I said softly. You and Rebecca need to do what's best for your marriage. I'll respect your boundaries. I'll call before visiting, and I'll wait for invitations to those twice-monthly dinners. But I want you to know something. I paused, making sure I had his full attention. There are things about this house, about your life, about the help I've given you, that you don't fully understand. And someday when Patricia has settled in and you've had time to see how this new arrangement really works, we're going to have a conversation about those things. Until then, I'll step back and give you the space you think you need. His brow furrowed in confusion. What are you talking about? What things? I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You'll find out soon enough. Enjoy your new living arrangements, sweetheart. I hope they bring you everything you're hoping for. I walked out before he could respond, climbing into my car with as much dignity as I could muster. It wasn't until I was 3 blocks away that I finally let the tears fall, pulling over into a grocery store parking lot to sob into my steering wheel. The pain was physical, a sharp ache in my chest that made it hard to breathe. My son, my only child, the person I devoted my entire adult life to raising and supporting, had just told me I was being too much, that I needed to back off, that another woman was taking my place in his home and his life. I don't know how long I sat there, crying in my car in that anonymous parking lot. Eventually my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Rebecca. Hi Eleanor. Daniel told me about your conversation this morning. I hope you understand that this is nothing personal. We just need to prioritize our nuclear family right now and establish healthier dynamics. Mom is really looking forward to being closer to us, and I think having her here will really strengthen our household. Thanks for being understanding. The casual cruelty of it, the assumption that I would just accept being pushed aside, the suggestion that Patricia's presence would somehow improve their lives in ways I never could, it reignited something inside me. Not anger exactly, but a cold, clear determination. I dried my eyes, took several deep breaths, and started my car. If Daniel wanted space and boundaries, I would give him exactly that. And in the process, he would learn some truths that were going to fundamentally change his understanding of everything. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange, painful silence. Daniel didn't call, didn't text, didn't reach out at all. I kept myself busy with work at the community center where I volunteered, spent time with friends, tried to pretend that the absence of my son's presence in my daily life wasn't leaving a gaping hole. I'd gotten used to our regular coffee dates, to him stopping by on his way home from work, to Sunday dinners at their house where I'd help Rebecca cook and we'd all laugh and talk about our weeks. Now there was just silence. I did get one text from Daniel, brief and formal, inviting me to dinner the following Sunday at 6 p.m. The message included a note that Patricia would be joining us, and that they were looking forward to me meeting her in their home environment. The phrasing was so stiff and awkward that I knew Rebecca had dictated it, possibly even typed it herself on Daniel's phone. That Sunday I dressed carefully, choosing a simple but elegant navy dress and the pearl necklace my mother had given me. I decided that this dinner was going to be a performance, a careful display of the dignified, distant mother who knew her place and respected boundaries. I would be polite to Patricia, cordial to Rebecca, and I would watch. I would observe how this new arrangement was really working, and I would wait for the right moment to reveal what I knew. I arrived exactly at 6, not a minute early. Daniel answered the door with a bright, forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mom! Right on time. Come in, come in." The house smelled like Rebecca's signature pot roast, a recipe I'd taught her in their first year of marriage. I wondered if she remembered that, or if in her mind it was just something she'd always known how to make. The living room had undergone even more changes. New curtains, new artwork, a different arrangement of furniture. It looked sophisticated and expensive and completely impersonal, like a showroom rather than a home. Patricia was holding court on the couch, a glass of white wine in her hand, looking perfectly at ease. She was dressed in what I recognized as expensive casual wear, the kind of carefully curated outfit that was meant to look effortless but probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her blonde hair was styled in that ageless way wealthy women achieve, and her makeup was flawless. "Eleanor," she exclaimed, though we'd never been on a first-name basis before. "How wonderful to see you again. Rebecca and Daniel have been telling me so much about you." The subtext was clear in her tone. They'd been complaining about me, discussing the problem of the overbearing mother who didn't know when to step back. I smiled graciously and accepted her air kiss near my cheek, the kind of fake affection that people like Patricia specialized in. Dinner was excruciating. Patricia dominated the conversation, telling long stories about her life, her friends, her extensive travel experiences. She made frequent references to things she'd done with Rebecca and Daniel over the past 2 weeks, inside jokes I wasn't part of, plans they'd made together. Rebecca hung on her mother's every word, laughing at stories I suspected she'd heard dozens of times before, while Daniel looked increasingly uncomfortable, pushing food around his plate and avoiding eye contact with me. "Rebecca and I went shopping yesterday," Patricia announced over dessert, a store-bought cheesecake that made me think of all the homemade cakes I'd baked for family dinners. She has such wonderful taste, but I think I've helped her refine it a bit. We found the most exquisite pieces for the master bedroom. Really elevated the space. "That's lovely," I said neutrally. "It's nice that you two are spending so much time together." Patricia beamed. "Oh, we're inseparable now. You know, Rebecca was telling me that she always wished she had this kind of relationship with her mother growing up. My divorce was so difficult, and I'm afraid I wasn't as present as I should have been. But now we're making up for lost time, and Daniel has been so generous in giving us this opportunity." She reached over and squeezed Daniel's hand. "You raised such a thoughtful, caring son, Eleanor. You should be very proud." The words were perfectly pleasant, but I heard what she was really saying. "Your job is done. You raised him, and now I'm reaping the benefits. He's taking care of me now, not you." I watched my son's face as Patricia spoke, saw the flash of guilt and discomfort, and I knew that this arrangement wasn't sitting as well with him as he'd tried to convince himself it would. But he was trapped now, caught between his wife's expectations and his own growing unease. After dinner, I helped clear the dishes despite Patricia's insistence that I was a guest and shouldn't trouble myself. In the kitchen, Rebecca was loading the dishwasher with jerky, aggressive movements that suggested she wasn't as content as she appeared. "Everything all right?" I asked quietly. She didn't look at me. "Fine. Everything's fine. Mom's adjustment has been really smooth. Better than I expected, actually." But her voice was tight, strained. I decided to push just a little. It must be an adjustment, having another person in the house full-time, even when it's someone you love. Rebecca slammed a plate into the dishwasher with more force than necessary. "It's fine. It's what we wanted. What I wanted. Mom needs us right now and we're happy to help." The repetition, the defensive tone told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't fine. Whatever fantasy Rebecca had built up about living with her mother was already starting to crack under the reality of the situation. I left shortly after, with stilted goodbyes and hollow promises to do this again soon. In my car, I sat for a moment, processing everything I'd observed. Patricia's possessiveness, the way she'd colonized not just the physical space but the emotional space of the household. Rebecca's tension, hidden under forced cheerfulness. And Daniel, my son, looking more trapped and unhappy than I'd seen him in years. I pulled out my phone and opened my email, scrolling to a folder I'd created 3 years ago and rarely looked at. Inside were documents, contracts, records, all the evidence of truths I'd kept hidden because I'd believed they weren't necessary. I'd believed that my relationship with my son was strong enough, that my contributions spoke for themselves, that I would always have a place in his life regardless of what was on paper. I'd been wrong. And now it was time for Daniel to learn exactly what his boundaries and his new family arrangement were really going to cost him. But I wouldn't tell him. Not yet. I would let Patricia settle in further, let Rebecca's fantasy play out a little longer, let Daniel feel the full weight of the choice he'd made. And when the moment was right, when they'd had enough time to truly understand what they'd done, I would reveal the truth that was going to change everything. 3 weeks passed. I maintained the boundaries Daniel had requested, didn't call unless it was to confirm dinner plans, didn't drop by. I filled my time with other things, reconnected with old friends, took up watercolor painting, tried to build a life that didn't revolve around my son and his wife. But every day I thought about them, wondered how things were going, waited for the call I knew would eventually come. Came on a Thursday afternoon. Daniel's number flashed on my screen, and I almost didn't answer, almost let it go to voicemail just to make him wait the way I'd been waiting. But maternal instinct, that deep ingrained need to respond when your child reaches out, made me pick up. Mom. His voice sounded exhausted, strained. Can we talk? I need to ask you about something. My heart rate picked up. Of course. What's going on? There was a long pause, filled with the sound of his breathing, heavy and troubled. It's about the house. About the mortgage. I was going through some paperwork today, organizing files, and I found some documents that I don't understand. Documents with your name on them. I closed my eyes, a mixture of relief and sadness washing over me. It was time. What kind of documents, Daniel? I kept my voice neutral, giving nothing away. Mortgage documents. But that doesn't make sense because Rebecca and I own this house. We bought it 3 years ago. I remember signing all the papers, remember the loan officer explaining everything. But these documents say something different, and I need you to explain what's going on. I could hear the rising panic in his voice, the confusion of someone whose understanding of reality was being fundamentally challenged. This was the moment I'd been both dreading and, if I was honest with myself, anticipating. The moment when everything would come to light. I think we need to have this conversation in person, I said calmly. Are you home alone? He let out a shaky breath. Rebecca took her mom shopping. They won't be back for a couple hours. Mom, please just tell me what these papers mean. I'll be there in 20 minutes. We'll talk then. I hung up before he could protest, gathered the folder I'd been keeping ready, and drove to the house that had been the center of so much pain and conflict over the past month. Daniel was waiting at the door when I arrived, his face pale and drawn. He'd aged years in the weeks since our confrontation, I realized. There were new lines around his eyes, a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. He didn't say anything as I came inside, just led me to the dining room table where he'd spread out papers. I recognized them immediately, the actual mortgage documents, the deed, all the legal paperwork that told the truth about who really owned this house. Explain this to me, Daniel said, his voice barely controlled. These papers say that you're the primary owner of this house, that I'm listed as a co-owner, but that you hold 60% ownership. That doesn't make sense. Rebecca and I bought this house. We picked it out, we made the down payment, we've been paying the mortgage. I sat down at the table, opened my folder, and pulled out additional documents. Do you remember when you and Rebecca were first looking for a house? I asked quietly. You'd found this place and fallen in love with it, but your credit scores weren't quite high enough to qualify for the loan you needed. He nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the papers in front of him. You co-signed for us. We talked about it. You said you were happy to help us get started. I did more than co-sign, Daniel. I became a co-buyer. The house is in both our names because you couldn't qualify for the full loan amount on your own. The bank required that I be listed as a primary owner with a majority stake, because I was providing not just credit backing, but actual financial investment. I slid another document across the table. This is the record of the down payment. Do you remember how much you and Rebecca contributed? His face went even paler as he looked at the numbers. We put down $30,000. Our savings. And I put down $70,000. That's where the down payment came from, Daniel. You're 30 and my 70. You were so excited about getting this house that I don't think you fully processed what that meant legally. And I never pushed it because I didn't want you to feel indebted to me. I wanted you to feel like this was your house, Your accomplishment. He stared at the paper like it might suddenly rearrange itself into something that made more sense. But we've been making the mortgage payments every month for 3 years. I nodded. You have. And do you know how much the mortgage payment is? He rattled off the number automatically, the figure he'd been paying faithfully every month. I pulled out yet another document, this one showing the actual mortgage payment schedule. That's what you've been paying. But the actual mortgage payment is significantly higher. I've been covering the difference every month for 3 years. Roughly $1,500 a month that you didn't even know you weren't paying. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my son do the math in his head, watched him realize that over 3 years, I'd contributed an additional $54,000 to the house he thought he owned, on top of the original $70,000 down payment. Why? His voice cracked. Why didn't you tell me? Why let me think I was handling everything on my own? Because you needed to believe you could do it yourself. Because when you told me you were ready to be a homeowner, ready to support a wife and build a life, I didn't want to undermine that confidence by making you feel like you couldn't manage without your mother propping you up financially. I paused, letting that sink in. And because I believed that when you were more established, when your firm was more profitable, we'd work out the financial arrangements properly. I believed we had time, and that our relationship was strong enough that these details didn't matter. Daniel pushed back from the table, pacing to the window. Does Rebecca know about this? She knows what you know. That I co-signed, that I helped with the down payment. She doesn't know the full extent of it any more than you did. I kept the details private because I didn't want either of you to feel like I was holding this over your heads. He turned back to face me, and I saw something breaking in his expression, the realization of what he'd done spreading across his face like a stain. The guest room. The room I gave to Patricia. That's your room. This is your house. Oh God, Mom. This is your house, and I told you that you couldn't stay in it anymore. I put you on a visiting schedule for your own house. The papers on the table seemed to pulse with significance, each document a testament to sacrifices made and truths concealed, to a mother's love that had expressed itself through quiet financial support, and a son's pride that had kept him from seeing what was really happening. What happens now? Daniel asked, his voice small, younger than his 32 years. Now, I said carefully, we figure out what you really want. Not what Rebecca wants, not what Patricia expects, but what you want for your life and your home. And then we have an honest conversation about what that means, legally and financially and emotionally. I stood up, gathering my papers back into their folder. Take some time to process this. Talk to Rebecca if you want to, though I'd suggest you think carefully about how and when to have that conversation. And Daniel. He looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. I never wanted you to find out like this. I never wanted to use this information as leverage or punishment. But you made choices about your home and your family without understanding what those choices really meant. So now you know the truth, and what you do with that truth is going to define what kind of man you are, and what kind of life you're going to have. I left him standing in the dining room of the house I owned, surrounded by the evidence of everything he hadn't known, everything he'd taken for granted, everything that was now irrevocably changed. The drive home felt longer than usual, my mind replaying the look on Daniel's face as the truth settled over him. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction in his pain. Just a deep, aching sadness for what we'd lost and uncertainty about whether we'd ever be able to find our way back to each other. That evening my phone exploded with messages. First from Daniel, paragraphs of apologies in shock and confusion. Then, surprisingly, from Rebecca, her texts cycling through denial, anger, and eventually a request to meet and talk. But the call I was waiting for didn't come until nearly midnight, when my phone rang with Daniel's number again. Mom, he said when I answered, his voice thick with tears. Patricia needs to leave. I need her out of this house. I need to fix this. Please tell me I haven't destroyed everything. Please tell me there's a way to make this right. I looked out my bedroom window at the quiet street below, at the ordinary suburban world that continued on regardless of private family dramas and painful revelations. There's always a way to make things right, I said softly. But it's going to take more than just asking Patricia to leave. It's going to take honesty and humility and some very difficult conversations about what happened and why. Are you ready for that? Yes, he said without hesitation. Whatever it takes. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so incredibly sorry. And in that moment, hearing the genuine remorse in my son's voice, I felt the first small flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way through this darkness and back to each other. But the road ahead was going to be long and painful, and there were more revelations to come, more truths that needed to be spoken, more bridges that needed to be either rebuilt or permanently burned. The real story was just beginning. The following morning I woke to find 17 missed calls and a string of increasingly frantic text messages. Most were from Daniel, but 3 were from Rebecca, and surprisingly, 2 were from a number I didn't recognize but suspected was Patricia. I made myself coffee, sat at my kitchen table in the early morning quiet, and read through each message carefully, trying to understand the full scope of what had unfolded after I left their house yesterday. Daniel's messages were raw and unfiltered, clearly written in the midst of emotional turmoil. He'd confronted Rebecca the night before, shown her all the documents, explained the reality of their financial situation. According to his texts, she'd gone through several stages of reaction. First disbelief, insisting there must be some mistake. Then anger, accusing him of hiding the truth from her. Then horror as she realized the implications of how they treated me. And finally, a kind of panic desperation about what this meant for their future. Rebecca's messages were more controlled but no less intense. She wanted to meet with me privately, without Daniel present. She needed to understand the full picture, she wrote, needed to know exactly what their financial obligations were and what I expected from them going forward. There was no apology in her texts, I noted. Just a businesslike tone that suggested she was already trying to figure out how to manage this situation to minimize damage. The messages from the unknown number were brief and cold. This is Patricia Whitmore. I understand there's been some confusion about living arrangements and property ownership. I think it would be beneficial for all parties if we could have a calm, adult conversation about moving forward. Please call me at your earliest convenience. The presumption in those words, the attempt to frame this as a simple misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with a polite chat, told me everything I needed to know about how Patricia viewed the situation. I didn't respond to any of them immediately. Instead, I called my lawyer Martin Chan, who'd handled the original house purchase and had tried at the time to get me to be more explicit with Daniel about the financial arrangements. I told you this would come back to bite everyone, Martin said without preamble when I explained why I was calling. You wanted to be generous and let the kids feel independent, and I understood that impulse, but clarity in financial matters is always better than ambiguity, even when it feels less kind in the moment. We spent an hour going over the legal details, reviewing what my rights were as the majority owner, what Daniel's position was, and what options existed for resolving the situation. Martin was thorough and professional, but I could hear the sympathy in his voice. He'd known me for 15 years, had handled my divorce from Daniel's father, had seen me struggle and sacrifice to build a stable life for my son. Whatever you decide to do, Eleanor, make sure it's what you actually want, not what you think you should do. You've spent your whole life putting Daniel first. Maybe it's time to consider what's best for you. After hanging up with Martin, I finally responded to the messages. I told Daniel we could meet for coffee that afternoon at a neutral location. I told Rebecca I'd be willing to talk, but only after I'd had a chance to speak with Daniel first. And I didn't respond to Patricia at all, letting that silence speak for itself. If she wanted to insert herself into this situation, she could do so through Rebecca and Daniel, not directly with me. The coffee shop I'd chosen was a small independent place in a neighborhood equidistant from my house and theirs. A deliberate choice to avoid either of us having home advantage. I arrived 15 minutes early and claimed a corner table where we'd have privacy. Daniel showed up exactly on time, looking like he hadn't slept. His hair was uncombed, his shirt wrinkled, and he had the hollow-eyed look of someone who'd spent the night in anguished contemplation of their mistakes. He sat down across from me without getting coffee, his hands immediately starting that nervous fidgeting I remembered from his teenage years when he was anxious. Mom, I don't even know where to start. I've been up all night trying to figure out how I could have been so stupid, so blind. How did I not know? How did I not realize what you were doing for us? I wrapped my hands around my coffee mug, using the warmth to ground myself. Because I didn't want you to know. I went out of my way to make sure you didn't fully understand the extent of the financial support. That was my choice and I own it. But Daniel, we need to talk about more than just the money. We need to talk about what happened over the past month, about the choices you made and why you made them. He flinched at that, dropping his gaze to the table. I know. God, Mom, I know. Looking back now, I can't believe some of the things I said to you. The way I treated you. It's like I was a different person, someone I don't even recognize. He paused, struggling with the words. Rebecca has been different lately. Ever since her mother's divorce became final about 6 months ago. She's been anxious about Patricia, worried about her mother being alone, feeling guilty that she couldn't do more to help during the divorce proceedings. And then Patricia started having these financial problems, and Rebecca became almost obsessed with the idea of taking care of her. I sipped my coffee, letting him talk, sensing there was more he needed to get out. At first it was just regular phone calls, then daily video chats, then Patricia was coming over several times a week. And every time she left, Rebecca would be in this weird mood, kind of manic and sad at the same time. She'd talk about how much her mother had sacrificed for her growing up, how Patricia had always put Rebecca first, how now it was Rebecca's turn to be the caretaker. The irony of that narrative, given what I knew about Patricia's actual parenting history, was not lost on me. Rebecca had spent most of her childhood shuffled between nannies and boarding schools while Patricia pursued her social life and various romantic relationships. But I didn't interrupt, letting Daniel continue his story. Then about 2 months ago, Rebecca started talking about how she'd never really had a close relationship with her mother, how she felt like they'd missed out on so much because of the divorce and Patricia's lifestyle choices. She said she wanted to make up for lost time, wanted to build the mother-daughter relationship she'd always wished they had. And I supported that, you know? I thought it was healthy that she wanted to heal that relationship. He looked up at me then, his eyes pleading for understanding. But then it became about more than just spending time together. Rebecca started comparing her relationship with her mother to my relationship with you. She'd say things like how lucky I was to have such a close bond with you, how I took it for granted, how I didn't appreciate that not everyone had a mother who was so involved in their lives. I felt a cold understanding beginning to form. She was jealous. Daniel nodded miserably. I didn't see it at the time, but yes, she was jealous of our relationship. And I think Patricia picked up on that and fed into it. She started making these comments about how mothers-in-law could be overbearing, how young couples needed space to build their own family culture, how traditional family structures could be suffocating. And Rebecca would just absorb it all, like she was finally getting permission to feel something she'd been suppressing. He ran his hands through his hair, that old gesture of frustration and confusion. Then Patricia's financial situation got worse. She'd made some bad investments, spent too much trying to maintain her lifestyle after the divorce, and suddenly she was facing the possibility of having to sell her condo and move into something much smaller and less prestigious. And Rebecca just fell apart. She couldn't stand the thought of her mother being in that position, couldn't bear the idea that Patricia might have to downgrade her life. I thought about the condo Patricia had been living in, the luxury building in the most expensive part of town, the lifestyle that required a 6-figure income to maintain. The idea that she'd been living beyond her means wasn't surprising, but the speed with which Rebecca had jumped to solve the problem spoke volumes about the guilt and anxiety Patricia had been cultivating in her daughter. So when did you decide that Patricia should move in? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Daniel's face flushed with shame. It was Rebecca's idea initially, but Patricia encouraged it. They had this whole conversation about how multi-generational living was becoming more common, how it made financial sense, how it would strengthen family bonds. And honestly, Mom, I was reluctant at first. I liked our privacy, liked our life the way it was. But Rebecca was so passionate about it, so convinced it was the right thing to do, and she made it sound so reasonable. He paused, and I could see him working up to the part he was most ashamed of. Then Patricia started planting these seeds about you. She'd mention casually how she'd noticed I seemed stressed after your visits. She'd ask Rebecca if she felt like she had space to be the woman of her own house, or if she felt like she was living in your shadow. She'd make these observations about how the house was decorated, suggesting that it looked like it was still your space instead of Rebecca's. And Rebecca started seeing everything through that lens. The manipulation was clear now, the careful way Patricia had worked to undermine my relationship with my son and daughter-in-law while positioning herself as the better, less intrusive mother figure. And the boundaries conversation? I prompted. The schedule, the rules about visiting? Daniel's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. That was Rebecca's therapist's idea. But I think Patricia was feeding Rebecca information to bring to therapy. The therapist talked about enmeshed relationships and healthy separation and individuation. She said that for Rebecca to fully mature into her role as a wife and potentially future mother, she needed to establish clear boundaries with extended family members who might be inhibiting her autonomy. I absorbed this, the clinical language that had been used to justify pushing me out of my son's life, the therapeutic framework that had been weaponized against our relationship. Did you tell the therapist about the financial support I'd been providing? About the actual nature of our relationship, and the help I'd given you? He shook his head. Rebecca handled all the communication with the therapist. I only went to a few joint sessions, and by then the narrative was already established. I was just the supportive husband backing up his wife's need for space from an overbearing mother-in-law. I didn't question it because I trusted Rebecca, and because part of me wondered if maybe they were right, if maybe I had been too dependent on you, if maybe it was time to grow up and be more independent. The pain of hearing that was sharp and immediate, but I pushed through it. And when did you decide to remove all my contributions from the house? The photos, the decorations, everything I'd given you. Daniel looked like he might be sick. That was the weekend you were at book club. Patricia and Rebecca did it together. They called it a redecorating project, said they were helping update our aesthetic. I came home from the office and everything was just different. When I asked about the family photos, Rebecca said we needed to make room for new memories, for our nuclear family. She said the old photos made her feel like she was living in a shrine to your relationship with me, instead of in her own home. He was crying now, tears streaming down his face unchecked. I should have questioned it. I should have pushed back. But Patricia was there, agreeing with everything Rebecca said, making it all sound so reasonable and healthy. And I was so tired of the tension, so tired of feeling caught between the two most important women in my life. So I just went along with it, told myself it was a small thing, that you'd understand, that we could always bring the photos back out later. I reached across the table and took his hand, a gesture that made him cry harder. Daniel, I need you to understand something. I'm not angry about the choices you made, or at least not in the way you might think. I'm sad about them, disappointed, hurt. But I understand that you were in an impossible position, being manipulated by someone who's very skilled at emotional manipulation. Patricia has had years of practice getting people to do what she wants while making them think it was their idea. He squeezed my hand like a drowning man clutching a lifeline. How do I fix this? How do I undo what I've done? The question hung in the air between us, weighted with desperation and genuine remorse. I took a deep breath, knowing that my answer was going to shape not just our immediate future, but potentially the rest of our relationship. First, you need to understand that this isn't just about Patricia leaving your house. It's about you and Rebecca having some very serious conversations about your marriage, about how decisions get made, about who has influence over your choices and why. Rebecca needs to understand that her mother's influence has been damaging, and she needs to be willing to set boundaries with Patricia, not just with me. Daniel nodded eagerly. I know. We talked about that last night, after I showed her all the documents. She's devastated, Mom. She had no idea about the full extent of your financial support either. She thought we'd been managing on our own with just a small amount of help for the down payment. She feels terrible about how she treated you. I noted that Rebecca felt terrible, but apparently not terrible enough to reach out with a direct apology. What about Patricia? What has she said about all this? His expression darkened. That's part of the problem. When Rebecca told her mother about the documents and explained the situation, Patricia didn't react the way we expected. She didn't seem shocked or apologetic. Instead, she got defensive and angry. She said that property ownership didn't give you the right to dictate how we lived our lives, that adult children shouldn't be financially dependent on their parents anyway, and that this whole situation just proved that you'd been using money to control us. The audacity of that interpretation, coming from a woman who'd been living rent-free in a house I owned while actively working to exclude me from it, was breathtaking. And how did Rebecca respond to that? Daniel's jaw tightened. That's when things got really ugly. Rebecca defended you, said Patricia was being unfair, and that we owed you more respect and gratitude than we'd shown. And Patricia basically said that if Rebecca was going to side with you over her own mother, then maybe Patricia had made a mistake in accepting our invitation to live with us. She said she had other options, other places she could go where she'd be appreciated. I recognized the manipulation tactic immediately. Patricia was trying to make herself the victim, trying to use guilt and the threat of withdrawal to bring Rebecca back into line. What did Rebecca say to that? He met my eyes and I saw something new there, a hardness that hadn't been present before. She told her mother that maybe those other options would be better for everyone. She said Patricia could take a few days to think about what she really wanted, but that in the meantime we needed space to work on our marriage and our relationship with you. Progress, I thought, but fragile progress that could easily be undone if Patricia applied the right pressure in the right ways. Where is Patricia now? Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Still at our house. She's staying in the guest room, barely speaking to either of us. She's been making pointed comments about how she's never been treated this way, how she sacrificed everything for Rebecca growing up, how this is the thanks she gets for trying to be supportive. And honestly, Mom, I want her out. I want her gone today. But Rebecca is struggling with actually telling her mother to leave. This was the critical moment I realized. How I responded now would set the tone for everything that followed. I could demand that Patricia leave immediately, use my legal ownership of the house as leverage. Or I could take a different approach, one that gave Daniel and Rebecca the space to make their own choices, while still protecting my own interests and dignity. Here's what I think should happen, I said carefully. Patricia needs to leave, but it needs to be Rebecca's decision and Rebecca's conversation. If I demand it, or if you demand it, Patricia will use that to reinforce her narrative about being pushed out and mistreated. Rebecca needs to be the one to tell her mother that the living arrangement isn't working, and that she needs to find alternative housing. Daniel looked relieved and worried at the same time. What if Rebecca can't do it? What if Patricia convinces her to let her stay? It was a valid concern, one I'd been thinking about since reading the morning's messages. Then we'll have a different conversation about what happens next. But Daniel, I need you to understand something. I'm not going to force anyone out of that house, and I'm not going to use my ownership as a weapon. But I'm also not going to pretend that everything is fine and go back to being pushed aside and disrespected. If Patricia stays, then we need to have a formal conversation about the financial arrangements and what everyone's obligations are. His eyes widened slightly. You mean you'd want us to start paying you back? I shook my head. Not exactly. But if Patricia is going to live in a house I primarily own, then we need clear agreements about what that looks like. Rental agreements, perhaps. Formal financial arrangements that protect everyone. I've been subsidizing your housing for 3 years out of love and a desire to support you. I'm not willing to subsidize Patricia's housing under any circumstances. The bluntness of that seemed to steady him somehow, giving him something concrete to work with. That's fair. That's more than fair, actually. God, Mom, you should be demanding we pay you back everything. You should be furious. I smiled sadly. I am furious, Daniel. I'm hurt and angry and sad about everything that's happened. But you're still my son and I still love you. That doesn't mean there won't be consequences for the choices you've made, but it does mean I'm not interested in punishing you. I'm interested in finding a path forward that respects everyone involved, including me. We talked for another hour, going over practical details and emotional landscapes, trying to map out what the next days and weeks might look like. Daniel was committed to asking Patricia to leave, to supporting Rebecca through that difficult conversation, to starting marriage counseling with a different therapist who could help them untangle the web of manipulation and guilt that had led them to this point. He also wanted to start paying me back, to begin making payments that covered not just the mortgage but the additional amounts I've been contributing all along. I need to feel like I'm actually taking care of my own life, he explained. Like I'm a real adult who handles his responsibilities. I can't do that if I'm living in a fantasy where I think I'm self-sufficient, but I'm actually being supported without knowing it. I understood that need, respected it even, but I also knew we'd need to work out the details carefully with Martin's help to make sure any repayment plan was realistic and didn't put undue strain on their finances. The goal wasn't to impoverish them, just to establish honesty and appropriate accountability. As we were preparing to leave, Daniel reached across the table and took both my hands. I'm so sorry, Mom. I know I keep saying that, but I don't know what else to say. I'm sorry for the things I said, for the way I treated you, for choosing someone else's comfort over your dignity. I'm sorry for not seeing what was really happening, for not protecting our relationship the way I should have. And I'm sorry it took finding those documents for me to wake up and realize what I'd done. I squeezed his hands, feeling the weight of 3 years of financial secrets and 1 month of painful estrangement. I forgive you, Daniel, but forgiveness doesn't mean everything goes back to the way it was. We're going to have to rebuild trust, and that's going to take time. I'm willing to do that work, but I need you to be willing too. And I need you to understand that my relationship with Rebecca is going to be different now. I'm not sure we can get back to the closeness we had before all this happened. He nodded, accepting that hard truth. I understand. I'll do whatever it takes, whatever you need from me. Just please don't give up on us. Don't give up on our family. I wouldn't, I promised, though I didn't add that our family was going to look different now. That some trust once broken can be repaired but never fully restored to its original state. We parted with a long hug in the coffee shop parking lot. And I drove home feeling emotionally exhausted but also oddly hopeful. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, but at least we were finally being honest with each other. That evening Rebecca called. Her voice was strained but controlled when I answered. Eleanor, I was hoping we could meet tomorrow. Just the two of us. I think we need to have a conversation without Daniel present. I agreed, curious about what she wanted to say. What version of events she'd constructed in her mind. We arranged to meet at a different coffee shop, this one closer to their house, in the late morning after she'd taken a personal day off work. Rebecca was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with an untouched latte in front of her. She looked terrible, her usual polished appearance replaced by dark circles under her eyes and hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She stood when she saw me, uncertain whether to hug me or shake my hand, ultimately settling for an awkward half-embrace that satisfied neither of us. We sat down and for a long moment neither of us spoke. Rebecca traced patterns in the foam of her latte, not meeting my eyes. Finally, she looked up, and I was surprised to see genuine distress in her expression. I don't know how to start this conversation. I've rehearsed what I wanted to say a dozen times, and now that you're here, none of it sounds right. I waited, giving her space to find her words. I need you to know that I had no idea about the full extent of your financial contribution to our house. Daniel showed me everything last night, all the documents, the payment records, everything. And I just kept thinking, how did I not know? How did I live in that house for 3 years without realizing that you were the one making it possible? There was genuine confusion in her voice, as if she truly couldn't comprehend how she'd missed such a significant fact. Your mother is very good at making people see what she wants them to see, I said gently. And I was very good at hiding my contributions because I didn't want you and Daniel to feel burdened by them. We both had our reasons for keeping you in the dark, though our motivations were very different. Rebecca flinched at the mention of her mother. Patricia has been my blind spot. I know that now. I've spent my whole life wishing we had a different relationship, wishing she'd been the kind of mother who was present and engaged instead of distant and self-involved. And when her marriage fell apart and she suddenly needed me, it felt like finally I was important to her. Finally she saw me as more than just an obligation or a disappointment. The raw honesty of that admission caught me off guard. I'd known Rebecca was hungry for her mother's approval, but I hadn't fully understood the depth of that need. She took advantage of that hunger, Rebecca continued, her voice breaking slightly. She saw what I needed from her, and she used it to manipulate me into giving her what she wanted. A place to live, financial security, and apparently the satisfaction of pushing you out of your own property. There was anger in her words now, anger directed at Patricia but also at herself. I let her convince me that you were the problem, that you were too involved, too controlling, that I'd never be able to be my own person with you so present in our lives. And I believed it because part of me did feel inadequate compared to you. You're so capable, so generous, so effortlessly good at being a mother. And I kept thinking, how can I ever measure up to that? How can I ever be enough for Daniel when he has you? The insecurity behind the cruelty, the fear of inadequacy that Patricia had exploited, it made a terrible kind of sense. Rebecca, you were never in competition with me. That's not how family works, or at least not how it should work. I wasn't trying to be the primary woman in Daniel's life. I was trying to be his mother while making space for you to be his wife. Those are different roles with different kinds of importance. She nodded, tears starting to flow freely now. I know that intellectually, but emotionally I felt like I was always coming in second. Like you'd always be the one he turned to first, the one whose opinion mattered most. And Patricia fed into that insecurity. She'd point out every time Daniel called you before making a decision, every time he mentioned something you'd said, every time he chose your advice over mine. And she'd say things like how unfortunate it was that some men never really left their mothers, that I deserved a husband who put me first. The calculated nature of Patricia's manipulation was becoming clearer with every revelation. She'd identified Rebecca's insecurities and systematically exploited them, all while positioning herself as the supportive mother who truly understood her daughter's struggles. The worst part, Rebecca said, wiping at her eyes with a napkin, is that I can see it all so clearly now. I can see how she played me, how she used my need for her approval to get what she wanted. But in the moment it all seemed so reasonable. It seemed like she was finally being the mother I'd always wanted. And I was so grateful for that attention that I didn't question her motives. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. Patricia is practiced at this. She's probably been manipulating people to get what she wants for her entire life. You're not weak or stupid for falling for it. You're just someone who desperately wanted a relationship with her mother, and was willing to overlook warning signs to have that. Rebecca looked at our joined hands, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I'm so ashamed of how I treated you. The things I said, the way I supported Daniel in pushing you aside, the casual cruelty of texting you about being understanding while we were literally erasing you from our home. I don't know how to apologize for that. I don't know how to make it right. This was the moment of truth, I realized. How I responded now would determine whether Rebecca and I could rebuild any kind of relationship. I could hold on to my hurt and anger, make her grovel, insist on elaborate demonstrations of remorse. Or I could take the harder path of genuine forgiveness, while still maintaining necessary boundaries. You make it right by learning from this, I said carefully. By recognizing the patterns that led you here and committing to not repeating them. By being honest with yourself about your relationship with your mother, and setting appropriate boundaries with her. And by understanding that while I forgive you, our relationship is changed. We can rebuild something, but it won't be exactly what we had before. She nodded, accepting that. I know. And I don't expect it to be. I just hope that eventually maybe we can find our way to something good again. Something honest. We talked for another hour, Rebecca sharing more details about Patricia's influence, about the subtle and not so subtle ways she'd been steering decisions and shaping perceptions. It painted a picture of a woman who'd moved into their home with a clear agenda. Establish herself as the primary maternal figure, marginalize me, and secure her own comfort and status regardless of who got hurt in the process. She needs to leave, Rebecca said finally, her voice firm despite the tears. I know that. Daniel knows that. But I'm terrified of telling her. She's going to make me feel guilty. She's going to act like I'm abandoning her when she needs me most. She's going to say I'm choosing you over her. The fear in Rebecca's voice was palpable, the fear of a child worried about disappointing a parent, even a parent who'd proven themselves unworthy of that concern. She probably will say all those things, I agreed. But that doesn't make them true. You're not choosing between us. You're choosing to protect your marriage and establish healthy boundaries. Those are adult choices that any good mother would support, even if they were personally inconvenient for her. Rebecca took a shaky breath. Will you be there when I tell her? Not in the room but in the house? I think I'll be stronger if I know you're there, if I know I have your support. The request surprised me, but it also touched me. Rebecca was asking me to witness her moment of standing up to her mother, to be there as she did the difficult work of setting boundaries. If that's what you need, then yes. I'll be there. We arranged the details. Rebecca would talk to Patricia the following day. She'd tell her mother that the living arrangement wasn't working, that Patricia needed to make other plans, and that she had 2 weeks to find alternative housing. I would be present in the house in a different room, available if needed but not directly involved in the conversation. It wasn't ideal, but it was a start, a first step toward Rebecca taking control of her own life and her own choices. As we left the coffee shop, Rebecca turned to me with an expression of desperate hope. Do you think we can get past this? All of us? Do you think our family can survive what's happened? I looked at this young woman who'd hurt me so deeply, but who was also clearly struggling with her own pain and regret. I think families survive all kinds of things if everyone involved is willing to do the work. But Rebecca, it's going to be hard. There are going to be setbacks and difficult moments and times when the hurt feels fresh again. You have to be prepared for that. She nodded. I am. Whatever it takes, I want to fix this. I want to be better than I've been. I drove home thinking about second chances and earned forgiveness, about the difference between enabling someone's bad behavior and giving them the opportunity to genuinely change. Rebecca had a long road ahead of her, learning to recognize manipulation, building genuine self-worth that didn't depend on Patricia's approval, developing the strength to maintain boundaries, even when it was uncomfortable. But she seemed genuinely committed to walking that road, and that was worth something. The next day arrived with a gray, overcast sky that seemed appropriate for what was about to happen. I drove to Daniel and Rebecca's house in the early afternoon, as we'd arranged. Daniel met me at the door, his face tense with anxiety. She knows something's happening. Patricia has been watching us like a hawk all day, making pointed comments about family loyalty and gratitude. It's been awful. I followed him inside, noting that the house still felt foreign to me with all the changes Patricia and Rebecca had made. Rebecca was in the kitchen, pacing nervously, her phone clutched in her hand like a talisman. She looked up when she saw me, relief and terror warring in her expression. Thank you for coming. I don't think I could do this without knowing you were here. Patricia emerged from the guest room at that moment, dressed impeccably as always, her hair and makeup perfect despite the tension in the house. She stopped when she saw me, her expression cooling immediately. Eleanor. How unexpected. Rebecca didn't mention you'd be joining us today. The false pleasantness in her voice was like nails on a chalkboard, the pretense of civility masking obvious displeasure at my presence. Mom, we need to talk. Rebecca's voice shook slightly but held firm. All of us together. Patricia's eyes narrowed, sensing danger. About what, darling? If this is about the little property misunderstanding, I've already told you that I think everyone overreacted. These things can be worked out between reasonable adults. Little property misunderstanding. The minimization was deliberate, an attempt to reframe massive financial support and legal ownership as a minor detail that shouldn't influence anything. I stayed quiet, letting Rebecca take the lead as we'd discussed. It's not a little misunderstanding, and it's not the only issue we need to address, Rebecca said, her voice growing stronger. The living arrangement isn't working. We've appreciated having you here, but it's become clear that this situation isn't healthy for anyone involved. Patricia's expression shifted, the pleasant mask slipping to reveal calculation beneath. Isn't healthy? Rebecca, I don't understand. We've been having a wonderful time together. We've been bonding, making up for lost time. Don't tell me Eleanor has convinced you otherwise in one brief conversation. There it was, the immediate attempt to blame me, to position this as my manipulation rather than Rebecca's own conclusion. This has nothing to do with Eleanor, Rebecca said firmly. This is about the fact that since you moved in, our marriage has been strained, our relationships with other family members have been damaged, and I've realized that the dynamic between us isn't as healthy as I wanted to believe it was. Patricia's face hardened. I see. So after everything I've done for you, after all the sacrifices I made raising you, this is the thanks I get? You're throwing me out because your husband's mother doesn't like having me around. The guilt tactics were immediate and heavy-handed, exactly as we'd predicted. I watched Rebecca struggle with them, saw the old patterns trying to reassert themselves, the lifetime of conditioning that told her she owed Patricia whatever Patricia wanted. You're not being thrown out, Daniel interjected, stepping closer to his wife in a show of support. We're giving you 2 weeks to make other arrangements. That's more than reasonable given the circumstances. Patricia turned her cold gaze on Daniel. I should have known this was your doing. You never wanted me here in the first place. You've been poisoning Rebecca against me from the start. The attempt to divide them was transparent but still potentially effective. I could see Daniel's anger rising, see him preparing to defend himself. But Rebecca spoke first, her voice cutting through the tension. Stop it, Mom. Just stop. This isn't about Daniel and it isn't about Eleanor. This is about you and me, and the way you've been using my guilt, and my need for your approval to get what you want without any regard for how it affects my marriage or my other relationships. Patricia's mouth opened and closed, clearly not expecting such direct confrontation. How dare you speak to me that way? After everything I've been through, after your father's betrayal, after losing everything in the divorce, you're going to turn on me too. The victimhood card, played with impressive dramatic flair. But Rebecca didn't fold. You didn't lose everything in the divorce, Mom. You got a very generous settlement. You lost your money because you spent beyond your means trying to maintain a lifestyle you couldn't afford. And you moved in here not because you had nowhere else to go, but because it was more comfortable and more prestigious than the alternatives you actually could afford. I felt a surge of pride at Rebecca's words, at her willingness to speak truth even in the face of her mother's manipulation. Patricia seemed to sense she was losing ground. Her expression shifted again, this time to wounded sadness. I can't believe my own daughter is treating me this way. I thought we were finally building the relationship I always wanted to have with you. I thought you'd finally forgiven me for not being perfect when you were growing up. The subtle repositioning from being called out for current behavior to being blamed for past imperfections was masterful. But Rebecca didn't take the bait. This isn't about forgiveness for the past. This is about setting boundaries for the present and future. I love you, Mom, but I can't have you living here anymore. It's not good for my marriage, and it's not good for me. You need to find your own place and build your own life instead of trying to live through mine. Patricia looked between Rebecca and Daniel, then at me, her expression cycling through anger, hurt, and finally settling on a kind of cold contempt. I see how it is. You've all decided to gang up on me, to make me the villain. Fine. I'll leave. But don't come crying to me when you realize what a mistake you've made. Don't expect me to be available when you finally figure out that Eleanor isn't the saint you all seem to think she is. With that, she turned and walked back toward the guest room, her spine rigid with offended dignity. The door closed behind her with a decisive click, and the three of us stood in the living room, processing what had just happened. Rebecca was shaking, tears streaming down her face, but there was also something like relief in her expression. I did it. I actually did it. Daniel pulled her into a hug, and she collapsed against him, all the tension draining out of her at once. I gave them a moment, then quietly excused myself to wait in the kitchen, giving them privacy for their shared relief and mutual support. I could hear them talking in low voices, Rebecca crying, Daniel reassuring her that she'd done the right thing, that he was proud of her, that they'd get through this together. It was a moment of genuine partnership, the kind of united front a marriage needed to survive challenges. And I was glad for them, even as I understood that my presence had been catalyst rather than solution, that the real work of their healing would happen in conversations and choices I wouldn't be part of. After about 20 minutes, they joined me in the kitchen. Rebecca's eyes were red, but her expression was determined. She's going to make this as difficult as possible for the next 2 weeks. She's going to try every manipulation tactic she has. I need to be ready for that. We spent the next hour discussing strategies for maintaining boundaries, for recognizing and deflecting guilt trips and emotional manipulation, for staying united in the face of Patricia's attempts to divide them. It was practical and necessary, and it also felt like we were finally having the kind of honest, supportive family conversation we should have been having all along. When I finally left, Rebecca walked me to my car. Thank you for being here. Thank you for not giving up on us, even when we didn't deserve your patience. I hugged her, a real hug this time, and felt the beginning of something that might eventually become trust again. We're not all the way through this yet. There's still a lot to work out, a lot of conversations to have. But today was a good start. As I drove home, I thought about everything that had happened over the past week, all the revelations and confrontations and painful truths. My relationship with Daniel and Rebecca would never be what it had been, that much was clear. But maybe it could become something better, something built on honesty instead of hidden support, on mutual respect instead of unspoken obligations. The road ahead was still uncertain, Patricia's departure from the house still 2 weeks away, the full reconciliation still a distant goal. But for the first time since that midnight message from Daniel, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we were moving in the right direction. And sometimes that's all you can ask for. Sometimes the first steps toward healing are the hardest and the most important, and everything else is just a matter of time and commitment and willingness to keep trying even when it's difficult. The story was far from over, but at least now we were all finally being honest about what the story actually was. 6 months passed like a slow healing of deep wounds. Patricia left the house after 3 weeks instead of 2, making every day as dramatic and difficult as possible. She tried tears, anger, and finally cold silence, but Rebecca held firm. The last image I had of Patricia was her loading boxes into a moving truck, her expression a mixture of fury and disbelief that her plans had unraveled so completely. Daniel and Rebecca started paying me back. Not the full amount but enough to acknowledge the debt and their commitment to honesty. We restructured the house ownership formally through Martin, establishing clear financial arrangements that protected everyone. They insisted on it, needing the dignity of truly owning their responsibilities. Our relationship rebuilt slowly, carefully. Sunday dinners became regular again, but different now. There was more honesty, more willingness to speak difficult truths, more respect for boundaries on both sides. Rebecca worked with a new therapist on recognizing manipulation patterns and building genuine self-worth. Daniel learned to balance his loyalty to his wife with his love for his mother, understanding finally that the two didn't have to compete. I sold them my majority share of the house last month. They qualified for refinancing on their own now, their credit stronger, their financial situation more stable. It felt right, letting go of that leverage, trusting them to stand on their own feet. They insisted on paying me back the difference, setting up a payment plan they could actually afford. Rebecca called me yesterday, her voice bright with news she'd been waiting to share. She's pregnant. They want me involved, want me to be the kind of grandmother I'd always hoped to be. And when she asked if I'd help set up the nursery, I heard genuine desire in her voice, not obligation. We're not perfect. Some hurts take years to fully heal. But we're honest now, and that makes all the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.